Now there were two others who were criminals who were being led away to be put to death with Jesus. And when they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right and the other on the left. But Jesus was saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." They cast lots, dividing up his garments among themselves. And the people stood by, looking on them. And rulers were sneering at him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself. If he's really the Messiah of God, if he's really God's chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up to offer him sour wine. And they were saying, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." In fact, there was this inscription above his head: "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who was hanging there was also hurling abuse at Jesus, saying, "Are you not Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked the first one, saying, "Do you not even fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving what we deserve for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." And then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said, "I tell you truly, today you shall be with me in paradise." It's important, especially when we get to Good Friday, that we understand the concept of atonement or redemption, that we have that down. And so to get it, we have to come at it a couple of different ways. Here's the first piece. You have been wounded, every one of you. You've been victimized in so many different ways. You and I both. We have all kinds of stories in our lives, times that we've been hurt, hurts that last, that sting, times when we've been ridiculed, times when we've been abused. Maybe in your family growing up there was violence. Maybe you were sexually assaulted. Maybe it was just neglect, parents who came from a generation that didn't know how to say "I love you," or so busy off doing something else, so caught up in whatever that there was nobody to tell you that you were worthwhile, and you grew up with this wound and this hurt. And then maybe just it's the stuff that happens in life. We seek out happiness and it doesn't happen. We seek out health and it slips from our grasp. All of the ways in which we've been hurt and wounded, and we say, "I believe in God, but there's a part of us that's going, "How could God do this to me? How could God stand there and let this happen? Why did God stand by and do nothing while this terrible thing occurred?" Maybe it was the loss of somebody you loved, and you prayed hard, "Lord, save them," and they died. How could God allow that to happen? Why didn't God intervene? When I think about this, I think about Franny, who was murdered in Las Vegas, and I remember her parents. They were so wounded by her wound, by the fact that she was killed. They were so lost. It was so hard for them. I mean, how do you even wrap your mind around that? Why did God let that happen? And this is a consistent piece of what it means for us to walk in this world. Everybody has a story of pain. Everybody has a story of suffering. Everybody has a story where we are victim. And we cry out, "Why? Why did this happen?" And we wonder where God was, and we look around, and we say, "Oh, I got to believe in God. I got to trust." But somewhere deep down, there's this rage, this confusion, this hurt that is so big that we've never known how to let it go. You know what I mean? Sometimes when the hurt is so bad that even though it wants to heal, we just can't let it go. We're holding on to it. Something that it's like if I let it go, somehow it's almost as if I'm minimizing it. It's just too terrible to be forgiven. I got to hold on to this pain. This is just too much. And we walk through the world with this hurt. This is the first half of redemption. It's a choice that God makes. It's the strangest choice, so strange. I actually call it a peculiar grace because I have no other way to describe this. When I was preaching Franny's funeral, this is how I said it. Where was God when Frances was being killed? When she was being stabbed to death? God was with her, being stabbed to death on a cross. And where was God when your daughter was being killed, murdered? God was watching his son be murdered. You see, the first part of redemption is that God's answer to our, why does God let this happen, is to choose instead to suffer it too. That's what the cross is about. The cross is that place in time and space in the center of all history where every single crime committed, every cruel act, every word of injury, every time any of us has ever been hurt, betrayed, injured, attacked, all of it on Jesus in that moment, in that place, which means that instead of us suffering alone and going, God, where were you when I was suffering? God is there with that eternal answer, I am with you, even here, even in this. Even in the most impossible piece of it, which is dying itself. You might remember we were praying for Jerome recently, and Jerome's cancer progressed suddenly very rapidly at the end. And he was on heavy medication because of the pain, but he would have these moments of clarity. And there was one moment he suddenly was clear, and he looked at his wife, and he said, why are there all these people here? Is this hospice? Am I dying? And she said, yes. And he wept. But in that moment when he died, he was not alone. He was not abandoned. Because the cross is the way in which God has chosen to be present, to be there literally in that place of death and dying. So that even there, Jerome was not alone. Even there, you and I will not be alone. So God has chosen to be with us in everything we've ever suffered in order to redeem it. What does God bring from it? God brings life and healing. By his stripes we are healed, it says. All of that stuff I carry around in the cross, Jesus has come to bear it so that with Jesus I can be healed of it. That's the first piece of redemption. Here's the second piece. A lot of times when people think about God, they think that God is really not very nice. This idea of God as being this sort of stern and easily offended deity. Oh, be very, very careful. You might make God angry and he'll swallow us whole. And so we have this worry that, if we've ever been mad at the Lord, or if we've ever had a lapse in our faith, or if we've ever sinned against God, that somehow God is ready to just consume us in fire because God is so angry at us. Have you never read the story of the prodigal son? The father is looking down the road, waiting for the son to return. God is looking for us to come back. Every sin you commit against God, God is more than happy to forgive it. The problem is not the sins we've committed against God. It's the sins we've committed against others. That's where the problem lies. You see, nobody has the right to forgive on someone else's behalf. A woman came and talked to me once, and she was telling me about her poor daughter had been sexually assaulted by a neighbor. And she said, I was so angry, I can't forgive him. And I looked at her and said, I know you can't. That's not your job. You don't have the authority to forgive him. Only your daughter has the authority to forgive him because she's the victim. Only the victim can forgive. No one can take that authority from the victim. No one can do that on their behalf. So if I've done something cruel or unkind, and I have, maybe I can go to that person and I can apologize and they can forgive me, but not always. Do you ever have one of those moments where you suddenly just for some random reason thought of something that happened years ago and you realize that you were really cruel and unkind to somebody? And you're thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, and you don't even know where that person is anymore, so that you could ask for their forgiveness even if you wanted to, or even in some cases, who they were, you just remember doing it, but you don't remember who it was, and you realize, I hurt this person. I did this to them. I said these cruel words. I know you're probably not a lot of hardened criminals in this room. I'm fairly certain that there's not a trail of bodies behind you. But I had a conversation with a man in my office. He's a very nice guy, actually, and he was living the straight and narrow, but he'd been to prison, for murder, something to do with drugs, and you know how that is. And we talked about the idea of forgiveness. And he was literally living in that place of unforgiveness, because how could he possibly gain forgiveness for what he did? I mean, the man was dead. He couldn't go and get forgiveness from the man who died. And then what about all the collateral damage that he caused? Any of you who have been in my confirmation class or many classes with me have heard me say this. This is a very important principle. What is lost is always greater than what is taken. So he took the life of this one man, but that means that man's children lost a father, and his friends lost a friend, and his community lost somebody who was part of them. And there was a future that could have been that was lost. And there were memories and stories that were now never to be remembered anymore, that were lost. What is lost is always greater than what is taken. He took a life, but what was lost was a lot more than that. How could he possibly, even if he wanted to, seek all of those people out and get forgiveness from each of them for all of the loss that his crime inflicted upon them? How is that even possible? And that's the extreme example, but you and I understand that because, you've had those moments where you've driven by somebody who needed help and you didn't help them because you were in a hurry. Or those times when you maybe, you know how it is, you said something sharp and unkind to somebody, and then you were on your way and you never got a chance to take that back. And so it's there, it hangs in the air, it doesn't go anyplace. Sometimes those words just bore their way into the heart. How do we undo that? How do we go back and fix that? How do we get forgiveness for that? How do we find all of those people who are our victims so that we might make our confession to them and receive forgiveness from them? And what happens if, in fact, we try to get forgiveness from somebody and they won't forgive us? What if they're so stuck holding on to the pain that we caused them that I can't forgive you because if I let go of this pain, it means I'm saying that what you did was forgivable, and it wasn't. It was unforgivable. That was unforgivable, and I won't let it go. What happens then? The Bible says what you bind on earth is bound in heaven. Does that mean I'm stuck, unforgiven from then on? This is the second half of redemption. You see, because the very act of Jesus where he chooses to come and be with us as we are victims of things that have happened to us, he also chooses to be our victim. To the extent that each one of us is a perpetrator, Christ becomes victim of what we've done, what I've done, what you've done. He becomes my victim. All of my victims brought together in one divine victim. And guess what that does? That gives Jesus the authority to forgive us. That's how he claims the authority to forgive us, is by getting on that cross and becoming victim, because only a victim can forgive. He becomes the victim so he can forgive us, you and me. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to ask for forgiveness sometimes? What is that about? You ever notice how hard it is to let go of the old hurts and pains and things that we've suffered, to even to tell people what's happened? How many of us in this room right now walk around with stories that we just haven't ever told anybody? Things that have happened to us that we just Do we just, we can't bring ourselves to speak. What a petty thing is that vanity that keeps us from the cross. The Romans, when they invented crucifixion, they were just trying to figure out how to come up with a really terrible way to kill people. That was kind of their plan. I think they borrowed it from the Babylonians or somebody. But, the basic thing was, what can we do that's going to really stretch it out, make it last a long time, and try to create a deterrent effect to the extent that that's possible so that other people won't do the same thing. And so crucifixion was their deal. And now, part of being crucified, which does not show up in any of the artwork, is in fact that when you're crucified, you're completely naked. This is because you want as much exposure as possible, leading to dehydration. People's arms and hands are bound, so then the bugs can bite them, the birds can chew on them. There's nothing they can do about it. So it just kind of makes it worse and worse and worse. But what the Romans were like the Greeks. The idea of nudity meant nothing to them. It wasn't a big deal at all. They weren't like the Jews. The Jews instead had this deep, profound feeling about being naked. Huge. Its origin you find right in the beginning of Jewish thought. The way Jewish thinking is, the story in the garden. It says this is after that moment of disobedience to God, eating the one thing God said, you can have everything you want, just don't eat that. And after that one thing, the tree of the knowledge of good and beneficial and harmful. We say good and evil, but it's more like beneficial and harmful. The one that suggests that if you have that information, maybe you don't need God anymore. The one that appeals to the ego that says, I want to be on my own. I don't want to have to depend upon the divine. That one. When they eat that one, then it says this, and God was moving about in the garden in the cool of the day and called out, Adam, where are you? But Adam hid himself because he was naked and ashamed. This is a deep idea. So when the Romans put people on the cross in Palestine, they didn't understand initially, maybe they got it later, but they didn't actually realize initially that what they were getting was not just a really crummy way to die, but a way to entirely and completely humiliate a Jew in Palestine. It was unbelievably humiliating. And so you can understand why these other two guys are like, don't look at me, look at him. Right? Have you ever been in one of those situations where everyone's making fun of somebody and you jump in with them because maybe they made fun of you another time and you don't want them looking at you now? This is your chance to be in with the crowd. Here are these two guys on a cross who are there because they're part of the insurrection. You understand what insurrection is? This is Al-Qaeda in Israel. They're what we call zealots, or Sicarii is the Roman term. They're the terrorists. And they were part of an insurrectionist action. They apparently were part of an assassination of somebody, described here as murder, but from their point of view, it was a political assassination. And there they are now up on the cross, and everyone's looking at them, and they are naked and ashamed. And they can't hide like Adam hides in the garden. And so they try to get people to look over there at that guy. They try to suggest from their position on the cross that we're really with you guys against that one. Except for this one moment, this one of these two guys, this one moment, something happens. I don't even know how to describe it. It's almost as if in a split second, he forgot about his own embarrassment. It's almost like just for a moment, all of that vanity, all of that embarrassment, all of that shame, all of that self-consciousness just kind of slipped away. And he saw clearly, just long enough to go, hey, this guy's innocent. We actually are terrorists, but this guy's innocent. And then he goes one more step, and this is really a remarkable step. He looks at Jesus and he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Now, I know when we think about stories of redemption, there's usually lots of tears, right? We think about those moments when we come to God and we fall down on our faces and we cry out, "Oh Lord, I'm so broken. Can't you heal me?" All of these things that have happened to me have just piled on me. I need you to be with me in my suffering so that by your stripes I may be healed. Or we come before God weeping and crying, "Lord, I'm so sorry for everything I've done and I can't do anything to fix it. Please grant me forgiveness so I can be free of it and live a different kind of life." And so we think of it as just filled with tears. But how about this for redemption? A guy's just honest. He's up there on a cross and he's just honest. "Hey, I'm broken. I deserve this. I got here on my own without help from anybody else. But there's something going on here. And Lord, this is all I'm asking. Remember me." He doesn't ask for forgiveness. He doesn't ask for glory. He just says, "Remember me. Remember me." That's all he asks. And I find that incredibly powerful. Because sometimes we're just not comfortable, you know. I mean, I guess maybe it's that whole Wisconsin Scandinavian thing, right? Weeping and wailing in church, not our deal. We're kind of, it's like what I like to say about Pentecostals in Minnesota, you know. Praise the Lord, don't you know? Right? There's a part of us that's sort of uncomfortable where we're like, yeah, Lord, you know what I'm really thinking, okay? I don't have to say it, right? And so here's this moment of a guy looking past vanity and pride and embarrassment and what will everyone else think. And it's not a big, long prayer. It's not a tearful confession. It's actually something really simple. It's a recognition of a truth. I got myself here. But I'm going to ask you to remember me in your kingdom anyway. How simple is that? How small a thing that is, just to step outside of that vanity and ego and just say, I got here on my own, and I'm busted up, and I'm broken. But will you remember me anyway? And what an answer that small little request gets. I tell you with absolute certainty, today you will be with me in paradise. Today you will be with me in paradise. What a small thing is our egos. It has the power to keep us from the presence of Jesus in paradise. And how much better off if we can just stop taking ourselves so seriously. Stop wanting to be someplace where everyone is looking at the other guy. Stop wanting to go to the church where they preach about everyone else's sins except for mine. Stop going to the place where the pastor rails against those guys because none of those guys are in the room with us guys. We can just let it go and be in a place where God speaks to our hearts and we can look at ourselves and say, I got me here. But remember me anyway. And let there be a place for me with you. Can you find the prayer response? What a little thing is vanity, and yet it can keep me from paradise. What a tiny thing is ego, and yet it can keep me from grace. What a slight being I am, yet so self-important from my vantage point. But even smaller yet is a moment of unself-consciousness, of seeing beyond my wounded pride and petty vanities, a moment of glimpsing you. Just one glimpse, one instant of clarity, 1 second of humility, one glimmer of recognition, and one small request. Remember me. And paradise becomes mine. No, Lord, that is not quite right. Paradise does not become mine. I become yours. And then I come to be with you in paradise. Thank you, Lord Jesus. Amen. What a little thing is vanity. What a small thing is our egos, our concern about what everyone else is going to think of us. I'm going to ask you to think about doing something. And that's just to come up here, just to walk up here. And to be a person who's willing to say, I am broken. I got here on my own. But Jesus, remember me in your kingdom.